I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Jonathan Ashworth.
Thank you, and I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I start by saying it is a pleasure to see you re-elected and in the chair, and please accept my congratulations on your fine re-election. I wanted to bring to the House an opportunity to talk about the human rights situation in Burma, Myanmar, and particularly about the situation, the migrant boat crisis we have seen and we've seen reported upon in recent weeks in the media. The heartbreaking coverage as thousands of Rohingya refugees and Bangladeshi migrants remain stranded in squalor in smugglers' boats at sea, while initially Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia refused to allow them to land. Some estimate that in the last 15 months, 88,000 Rohingya and Bangladeshi migrants have taken to the seas. Indeed, between January and March of this year, 25,000 Rohingya and Bangladeshi boarded smugglers' boats, double the same period of 2014. It was only after international pressure and the reports in the media that the Thai, Malaysian and Indonesian authorities allowed migrants to arrive on their shores, and in recent weeks, 3,500 or 4,000 have been allowed into Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia, or returned to Burma, Myanmar. Of course I'll give way.
I commend the honourable member on bringing this issue to the House, an extremely important issue. Would he agree with me that what needs to be looked at is the situation and the circumstances in which so many of these people are living in Burma, and that urgent representations need to be made to the government of Burma or Myanmar for humanitarian access to those areas so that these can be improved radically, which is very much needed?
I thank the honourable lady for, I believe, Congleton, I think it is, for her remarks, and she hits the nail on the head very quickly. And I will come further on in my remarks to the persecution of the Rohingya in Burma, which is driving this migrant crisis. But can I also say I saw the honourable lady's statement a few weeks ago on behalf of, I believe, the Conservative Party Human Rights Campaign, and I entirely endorse what she said, and I'm pleased she's been able to get her point on the record this evening. Throughout early May, it seemed that every day came another report of abandoned migrants found at sea. 10th May, 575 migrants rescued near Indonesia. 11th May, 1,018 migrants found on the Malaysian coastline. 11th May, again, a vessel carrying 400 migrants intercepted by the Indonesian Navy. 13th May, boat carrying 300 migrants turned away from Langkawi Island near Malaysia. 13th of May, another boat carrying 500 turned away, this time from Penang Island near Malaysia. 14th of May, a boat carrying 300 migrants leaves the Thai shore, given food and water, but refused refuge in Thailand. 15th May, 700 migrants rescued by a fishing boat after their vessel sinks near Indonesia. And last week, in Burma, Myanmar, 700 refugees brought ashore, found drifting in the Andaman Sea in an overloaded fishing boat, taking in water. And the coverage we have seen, and I pay particular tribute to the BBC and Al Jazeera for their reporting, but the coverage we have seen has showed refugees, desperate scenes of refugees, dehydrated, children emaciated, starving. On these boats, women endure rape and other sexual violence. Many of the women are forced into marriage with men who pay for their journey. Of course I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Does my honourable friend share my concern that no preconditions were set before training was started by the British Army for the Burmese military? And in spite of the allegations of continued sexual violence, and given now that Burma has been included in the Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative, would you join with me in asking the Minister to ask what is being done about this?
I think my honourable friend Stephanie makes an extremely valid point, and I hope the Minister who sat on the Treasury bench reflects upon it and perhaps can say something about it in his remarks in summing up the debate. These boats have been abandoned by people traffickers, leaving those on board with no food, no water, leaving those on board initially in a position where they were refused sanctuary by the countries they were trying to escape to. The Rohingya people, Madam Deputy Speaker, are often described as the most persecuted people in the world. These were men and women and their children fleeing Burma, Myanmar, to escape what some have described as apartheid-like conditions, hoping to reach predominantly Muslim countries like Malaysia, via the jungles of southern Thailand, and yet many meet certain death, if not swallowed up by the Southeast Asian seas, but slung into mass graves when they eventually get to the Thai-Malaysian borders. One migrant told the Financial Times, Zaire Rahman, he escaped from Burma to Bangladesh. He was then kidnapped and trafficked to Thailand before being sold on and making it to Malaysia. He said, I have an ambition to help my mother and help my nation. But everywhere is dying for the Rohingya. Everywhere is killing and beating and trafficking. Everywhere. Today, it is not clear how many migrants remain at sea in boats abandoned by the people traffickers. Search and rescue vessels from Malaysia and Indonesia have not yet located more migrant ships. But the reason why so many of these boats have been abandoned is a tragic consequence of Thailand, for entirely right reasons, I emphasise, seeking to stamp out its appalling record on people trafficking in the region. The consequence, however, has been that many of these smugglers, no longer able to bring their human cargoes ashore, have resorted to abandoning boats or dumping their human cargoes on islands near the coastline. Sadly, and in tragic circumstances, they've had no option but to essentially kill some of those cargoes. And the Thai authorities found graves of 150 bodies found along the Thai-Malaysian borders. Many of these bodies in these graves thought to be Rohingya migrants. The US and the EU have criticised the authorities for failing adequately to deal with people trafficking, and the Thai authorities have in recent months arrested several government officials, from army colonels to town mayors, thought to be involved in people trafficking. Indeed, in the news in the last 24 hours has been reports of a senior Major General's involvement in trafficking the Rohingya. But the problem, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that with no single government in the region prepared to show any leadership or take any real responsibility, it is no wonder that the UN have described the situation as a massive humanitarian crisis. And while, yes, there was a conference in Bangkok on 29th of May to respond to the crisis, and yes, it is of course welcome that the countries at that conference agreed to intensify search and rescue operations, while yes, it is of course welcome that the Indonesian and Malaysians agreed to offer shelter to migrants, albeit temporarily, and albeit in the expectation that the international community will resettle those migrants within a year. And while, yes, it is welcome that there was agreement to tackle the causes of migration through job creation and promote, and I quote, full respect for human rights and adequate access of people to basic rights and services such as housing, education and healthcare, while these commitments are indeed welcome, and I would be interested to see what assessment the Minister gives us of these commitments, was it not hugely disappointing that that conference refused even to publicly utter the word Rohingya? That conference refused to recognise that driving this issue is the persecution of the Rohingya people in Burma and Myanmar. That driving this issue is the fact that Burma and Myanmar refuse to recognise to this day the citizenship of the Rohingya. And I have spoken, as have many members who are here tonight in this House before, on the issues regarding citizenship, and I will reiterate some of those points in a moment. But before I do so, let me just say a brief word about ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Because this crisis, and I hope the Minister will agree, has become a major test of ASEAN. It has become a major test of the association, because if they want to launch a single economic market by the end of the year, and as I understand it, that is their plan, if they want to have a single economic market, does not a single economic market demand that it is based on rules? Does it not demand that if there is going to be movement of labour, it should not be trafficked labour with smugglers' networks in which government officials, it would seem, are complicit? I would be grateful for the Minister's comments on that. And this single economic market which ASEAN wants to create by the end of the year needs to face up to the human rights abuses of the Rohingya in Burma. It is why I was so disappointed, as I said, that it refuses to recognise the Rohingya. Of course I'll give way.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way and congratulating him on securing this very important debate, and follow on from the point made by my honourable friend from Congleton. And she and I both went to Burma with the Speaker 2 years ago now. But does he not agree with me? This is a classic case for the United Nations to get involved. and for the Secretary-General to take personal control of this enormous, overwhelming humanitarian crisis.
Yeah. Thank my honourable friend from Walsall, and she's absolutely right. Now, can I pay tribute to the work that she has done over the last Parliament, and I know will continue to do in this Parliament, on raising the issue of Burma. I know she's been a strong and persuasive voice for Burma, and I'm pleased she's got her point on the record, which I agree with, and I will come on to. In Western Burma, particularly Rakhine State, and I know the Minister is proud to have been the first Western Minister to have visited Rakhine, and for that he has my appreciation. 1.1 million Rohingya are denied citizenship and denied access to jobs, denied access to basic services. Indeed, as he knows, after the brutal sectarian violence in 2012, many of the Rohingya were forced out into some of the worst camps ever seen, according to the UN. And in the last year, the conditions have worsened for the Rohingya. They have been denied voting rights unless they are prepared to register themselves as Bengali, and they do not recognise themselves as Bengali, as the Minister is well aware. The Minister will also be aware that the violence that we saw in Rakhine a few years ago, where Rohingya were driven from their homes, was often with the complicity of local officials, if not national Burmese officials. It was certainly the case that local officials appeared to turn their back on some of the communal violence. So is it not today an absolute disgrace that when the UN adopts resolutions, as it did in December 2014, urging the Myanmar government to grant Rohingya full citizenship and calls for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the office, to be opened in Myanmar without delay, the response of the Myanmar Burmese regime is to refuse to even acknowledge the Rohingya as an ethnic group still, and then say reports of Muslim persecution are a fabrication? Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree with the President of the United States when he says, and quite rightly, that Burma, Myanmar should end this discrimination against the Rohingya. Now, of course, there is going to be elections later this year, and is it not now the view, or should it not now be the view, that for the British government, that given the migrant boat crisis we've seen of these last few weeks, is it also now the time for all Burmese political leaders to speak up and do what they can for the Rohingya and say that the Rohingya citizenship should be recognised? He will be aware that there's one particular prominent leader that many of us are keen to see speak up and say that the Rohingya citizenship should be recognised. I also know that, according to reports, the US Assistant Secretary of State Ann Richards said recently in Jakarta that while the US was not considering imposing sanctions, or more sanctions, that sanctions remain in the diplomatic toolbox. Can I ask the Minister to tell us what his view now is of sanctions, given the migrant crisis we have seen over these last few weeks? I recall in our last parliamentary debate in Westminster Hall in January, the Minister quite rightly told us of the government's commitment of 12 million in aid for Rakhine State, a 12 million in aid which I, of course, support. But given that we are set, as we know, for a roller coaster in the future projections of public expenditure, can he give us any indication of the government's future thinking in terms of aid and humanitarian assistance for Rakhine and then the region more generally? And picking up, as my humble friend from Walsall has said, does the Minister also agree that now is the time for the UN Secretary-General to be given personal responsibility for negotiating unrestricted international humanitarian access to Rakhine State? Could he tell us about what representations he's made at the UN level on that matter? And finally, on the boat crisis, can he update the House on the discussions that he and the FCO have had with the ASEAN nations in recent days? Is there any more support that we can offer to Thailand, for example, in dealing with people trafficking in the regions? And specifically, will he agree to lobby the ASEAN nations to, number one, ensure that generally life-saving measures are set up so that we can offer any support on search and rescue operations, that ships that disembark, that the migrants who are there are given appropriate access to humanitarian assistance? And can I ask him also particularly to raise the issue of children? Many of these children coming off these boats are unaccompanied. Will he undertake to lobby that in the shelters and camps in Malaysia and Indonesia and so on, that the children there are provided with child-friendly spaces and learning spaces so the children are protected and have access to education? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I say I am very grateful for this opportunity to have put some of these points on the record so early in the Parliament. And I look forward to a full response from the Minister, because whether it is the migrant crisis in these South Asian seas, or indeed the migrant crisis we've seen in the Mediterranean, we simply cannot walk by on the other side.
Yeah. Minister Hugo Swire.
Deputy Speaker, I congratulate the honourable member for Leicester South on his re-election and on securing this evening's debate, his second on this important subject within, I think, 6 months. And I also thank other honourable members for their contributions. That this debate comes so soon after the House's return demonstrates, I think, the importance that Parliament rightly places on the situation of the Rohingya and on the recent humanitarian crisis in the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea. A crisis made even more alarming by the discovery of mass graves in Thailand and Malaysia, and by boats either avoiding landing or being prevented from doing so. With conditions at sea becoming increasingly desperate, we welcome the 20th of May decision by the foreign ministers of Malaysia, Thailand and Indonesia to provide vital humanitarian assistance. Clearly, tackling this issue requires a strong and coordinated regional response. I'm glad that Thailand called last Friday's regional coordination meeting in Bangkok, which our ambassador represented the United Kingdom. And I welcomed the agreement of the countries involved to meet again soon. Those discussions, Madam Deputy Speaker, were a positive step, but much more, of course, remains to be done. Southeast Asian countries must continue to work together to tackle the appalling trade in human lives and its root causes, in particular to press Burma to address the situation of the Rohingya in Rakhine State. And with that, I can associate myself with the honourable member's comments about ASEAN and its future. According to the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, over 130,000 Rohingya left by sea between 2012 and 2014. But the numbers this year are something new, with a further 25,000 leaving in the first 3 months of 2015, nearly double that of the same period last year. I share the honourable member for Leicester South's deep concern about the many issues they face. That so many are willing to risk this highly dangerous journey speaks of increasing desperation within the community. A community where, 3 years since the ethnic violence of 2012, over 140,000 remain displaced in temporary camps, where humanitarian conditions, as I saw firsthand during my visit in 2012, are quite frankly dreadful. The February decision to cancel the temporary identity cards held by many Rohingya looks set to disenfranchise this community and leave them open to further restrictions, intimidation and abuse. As the crisis emerged last month, I took action in calling the Burmese ambassador to the Foreign Office to express our concern, pressing Burma to take urgent steps to deal with the humanitarian implications of the crisis as well as the underlying causes in Rakhine. I met the Bangladeshi Foreign Secretary in London on the 20th of May and urged Bangladesh to work within the region to address people trafficking and irregular migration in the Bay of Bengal.
Will the Minister give way?
Of course I can.
Thank you very much. I would just like to say that my father was born in Burma, so I take a great interest in these issues, and it's horrific what's going on there. So I congratulate the member for Leicester South in securing this debate. The member for Leicester South and the member for Walsall South have raised the issue about Ban Ki-moon taking a personal interest in this. And it's not just the two members, the two honourable members, it's also the Burma Campaign UK, Christian Solidarity Worldwide and a number of other organisations that are calling for this. I'd just be grateful for the Minister, when he continues his words, to let us know what the UK Government is doing on that regard.
Well, indeed, and may I welcome my honourable friend to the House, and also the fact that we now have interested in these matters somebody who has perhaps closer Burmese connections than any of the rest of us. Yes, of course, the Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon called the Burmese President Thein Sein on the 20th of May to discuss Rakhine and Burma's response to the migration crisis, and with our support, the issue of Rakhine was also discussed at a briefing of the UN Security Council on the 28th of May. My honourable friend may be unaware, but we do in New York at the UN General Assembly have had in the past few years a Friends of Myanmar, Friends of Burma, meeting around that time, and we'll be pressing for just such a meeting again this autumn. Madam Deputy Speaker, in Rangoon, our ambassador joined EU and US colleagues in delivering a joint démarche to Burmese ministers. And through our network of missions, we lobbied extensively throughout the region and coordinated regular discussion with like-minded states, NGOs and international organisations, including the International Organisation for Migration and UNHCR. The honourable member for Congleton, who has taken a very close interest in this, my honourable friend, raised the wider issue of Rakhine itself. We will continue to raise the problem in Rakhine at every opportunity. In particular, we continue to press the Burmese authorities for progress in a number of vital areas: improved humanitarian access, greater security and accountability, protection of civil and political rights for everyone in Burma, and a sustainable solution on citizenship. The honourable gentleman for Leicester South raised the issue of funding and the vast amount of money that the British taxpayer gives to Burma. But I can confirm, as part of our continuing commitment to supporting progress in Burma, we will increase our funding, or continue with our funding, which increased to £82 million this financial year. Just make progress, if I may. In Rakhine State, we are one of the largest bilateral humanitarian donors, giving over £18 million in humanitarian support there since 2012, including, I am pleased to say, an additional £6.2 million recently announced for 2015 and 16. The Honourable Lady for Llanelli raised the issue of our training of the Tatmadaw, the Burmese military. They remain a key force in Burma, and we believe it's right to continue to engage with them. We've consulted extensively. It's not true to say we haven't consulted. We've consulted extensively with members of ethnic groups, civil society, and the political opposition led by Aung San Suu Kyi, who is supportive of this approach. You cannot ignore the fact they still have a bloc in Parliament, and they need to be taught how to behave like a responsible military in a democratic country in the 21st century. I think it's key to repeat again that we do not provide any training in anything. It's all non-combat education and training, and we will continue to do so. In addition to our other bilateral work, we continue to operate through the UN and the EU. The Secretary-General called Burmese Thein Sein, as I've said, and also the UN Security Council discussed Rakhine on the 28th of May. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK has also been instrumental in securing strong UN resolutions on Burma, including the Human Rights Council resolution in March, which extended the mandate of the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Burma, Professor Yang Hee Lee, who has done so much to shine a spotlight on the plight of the Rohingya in particular. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've made our concerns extremely clear to the Burmese government, and we will continue to do so. And we will continue to work with the Burmese and our international partners for progress. The Honourable Member for Walsall South also asked, no, indeed it was an Honourable Member for, I think, Walsall South, about the others. No, it was an honourable gentleman himself, actually, who asked about the other people, and he said I would know who he was speaking about, and indeed I do. I would say that Aung San Suu Kyi does have a remarkable record of defending human rights and democracy, and we encourage all parties in Burma to work together to improve the humanitarian conditions and ensure respect for the human rights of all communities within Rakhine. But ultimately, it is the Burmese government which has, of course, the executive power. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Briefly, whether the Minister has any indication of the number or proportion of refugees that might be making their way to these islands, and what support the British Government is prepared to offer any of them that do end up here.
This, as far as we can ascertain, is a regional issue which needs to be addressed by the countries that we've mentioned. This is an ASEAN problem, but it is quite uncertain as to where the majority of these people are coming from. It's our assessment that they are coming for a combination of Rakhine itself, possibly also across the Bay of Bengal, some people getting onto boats, others coming down. It's pretty mixed. And the key thing is to the immediate humanitarian alleviation in getting them off the boats and getting them watered and fed. and then getting at the same time parallel track Burma and indeed Bangladesh in particular to play their part. But as far as we know, there are none heading here. That's not to say that we are not interested and we do not care. We care passionately about it, but at the moment it's for those countries in the neighbourhood to deal with it. I will deal with it, Madam, with your indulgence, Madam Deputy Speaker.
It's a regional issue. Isn't this an international issue? There's some grave international precedents of community groups and ethnic groups effectively almost being pushed out and cleansed and left to find their own ways on boats. Surely we recognise this as an international issue that demands international United Nations response.
Well, I hope I've obviously failed in demonstrating our interest and that of the international community by the fact that we have been pressing for this meeting which took place. I've discussed this with the respective ambassadors of Burma and High Commissioner of Bangladesh, the Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh, and equally we've been pushing in the UN and will push again in the autumn. So, of course, the international aspect is about the future transition of Burma to a democratic country with democratic values and tolerance of ethnicity, religion, sex, and all these other things that we take for granted. That is the international issue. The international issue also is, of course, about the humanitarian aspect of this crisis. But the immediate issue is a local issue. This is happening on the borders of those countries to which I've alluded, and it's for them to deal with this firsthand. It doesn't mean to say that the international community is turning its back on this situation. Quite the reverse, Madam Deputy Speaker. And to conclude, we've made our concerns extremely clear to the Burmese government repeatedly, and we will continue to work with the Burmese and our international partners to make progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, some have criticised our continuing engagement with the Burmese government, be it with the military, be it our aid programme, but we believe, in consultation with our international partners, that the best way to help Burma achieve real progress is to engage with all parties, including with the Rakhine community themselves, over their concerns. It's important that the international community demonstrates that it is listening to all sides so the arguments don't become more polarised than they already are, particularly, I should say, in the run-up to the forthcoming election. That's the way to help embed reform and encourage its transition towards a peaceful and democratic governance for the benefit of all Burma's people. With elections set for November, and in the light of the situation we have seen in the Bay of Bengal, that need, Madam Deputy Speaker, is more starkly apparent than ever. So I thank the Honourable Member for Leicester South for this opportunity to set out the government's position once again. I very much welcome the involvement of all members on all sides of the House. I'm particularly pleased that the Shadow Foreign Secretary is listening in on the opposition front bench, and I would particularly like to welcome my new colleague who has close genealogical, if that's the right word, connections with a country we all care passionately about. We want to see it transition from what's been an extraordinarily difficult, dark period. We can expect to see more of these challenges, and we can maintain our levels of interest and support, but at the same time not at the cost of turning our back on what is an appalling humanitarian situation.
The question is, this House do now adjourn. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order! Order!